Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Jordan Christie.
And I'm Barry Graham. We highlight this week's news and stories happening all over Hampton Roads.
In this week's program, a Virginian who received financial help for an abortion now helps run the state's newest abortion fund in Hampton Roads, a place where demand is rising as its politics are shifting.
And I wanted to be a part of bringing that to my hometown.
An Old Dominion University professor earned national recognition for her effort to reduce climate impacts in healthcare. WHRO spoke with her about her work.
And the U.S. Navy is embracing a plan to privatize its barracks. Officials hope private companies can better construct and maintain the buildings, many of which would be built in Norfolk. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. The courtroom battles over Virginia Beach's local voting system continue. A new filing aims to stop the city from using a system that's in the charter, but the city says that's unnecessary because it's never used the system. WHRO's Ryan Murphy breaks down the latest.
Carlos Pagan, a Latino man, and Nicole Bohm, who is Filipino and Mexican-American, have joined two black voting rights advocates, Latasha Holloway and Georgia Allen, to stop the adoption of a local voting system with multiple at-large seats. In a new complaint filed this month, the group alleges such a system would violate federal law. The city responded this week, saying the residents can't sue over a voting system that has not been and may never be used. City attorneys asked the court to dismiss the case. The issue will be on the ballot in November, asking Virginia Beach voters to choose between a 10-district system and a modified version of the previous system that would include 4 at-large seats on the 11-member council. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
The new Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Daryl Caudle, returned to Norfolk as the Navy presence grows near Venezuela. WHRO's Steve Walsh reports details of the buildup are unclear.
Caudle says the U.S. is concerned about Venezuela's relationship with drug cartels and that the details of the Navy buildup remain classified. Caudle says his job is to provide the ships.
This is just a perfect example of why a Navy and how we do our business the way we do to give Southern Command the forces they need to do these new missions.
The USS Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group left Norfolk over the weekend with its contingent of Marines bound for the Caribbean. 3 destroyers are also in the area, including USS Gravely, which is home-ported in Norfolk. A cruiser and submarine are also reportedly headed that way. Caudle met with the sailors on the USS Truman and took questions for nearly an hour. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
This November, Virginians will step into the voting booth with an important issue in mind. WHRO's health reporter Yiching Wang reports newly elected lawmakers could determine if abortion rights advance to the 2026 ballot.
Abortion is legal in Virginia, but it's not guaranteed in the Constitution. Lawmakers approved the first step of the amendment last year. The General Assembly must pass it again with the newly elected legislature, and the new governor will have to sign off before voters have the final say. Delegate Jackie Glass says the process is long and complex, but to do so would mean access to abortion is no longer at the mercy of the state's political winds.
The amendment is about protecting people's ability to shape and chart their own futures. That's essential for individuals, but it's also essential for Virginia and how we build healthy communities.
Abortion advocates call the amendment a safeguard for reproductive freedom. Anti-abortion groups say it violates their religious beliefs. Yiching Wang, WHRO News.
While abortion rights continue to be a pressing issue, one Virginian received help from a grassroots group when they stepped in to help pay for one. Now that woman is helping run the state's newest abortion fund in Hampton Roads, where demand is rising and the politics are shifting. WHRO's Yiching Wang has the story.
As a child, Amy Pasqua grew up hearing her mother talk about desperate ways to end pregnancies and often felt unwanted.
The only context I had for these, conversations, this is a terrible, bad thing. I'm a terrible, bad thing. My mom is a terrible, bad thing.
Years later, by then herself a mother of 2, Pasqua had an abortion and was left feeling isolated and alone. When she needed another one, she sought help from the Richmond Freedom Project. The fund paid for her procedure, and for the first time, someone asked how she was feeling. Did she need a ride? Did she have support?
And I literally broke down in tears, sobbing, crying, because I hadn't ever been offered that kind of support before.
It was the first time Pasqua felt truly cared for.
That connection from that phone call was so significant and started so much. So I was so grateful for that.
That experience stuck with her. When she later learned Hampton Roads, one of the most populous parts of Virginia, had no local abortion fund, she jumped at the chance to change that. Pasqua helped get the Hampton Roads Reproductive Justice League off the ground 2 years after her own abortion.
Because I knew the immense and amazing resource that abortion funds are and what they do and how they change people's lives. And I wanted to be a part of bringing that to my hometown.
The fund is entirely volunteer-led, with a budget of about $900 a week, enough to help between 3 and 5 patients. The money comes from small dollar donations, sometimes from former patients. As an outreach volunteer, the soft-spoken Pasqua connects people to money, rights, and emotional support for abortion care.
What keeps me going is knowing that it needs to be done. It needs to get better out there.
When she's not volunteering, Pasqua is raising her 2 sons as a stay-at-home mom. On a weekday afternoon, Pasqua opens the front door to check for a delivery of Plan B to supply the fund's free emergency contraception distribution program. The Hampton Roads Fund is the state's newest. 4 others operate around Virginia. The oldest, the Blue Ridge Abortion Fund, has been serving people across Virginia for 36 years. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, Blue Ridge has supported about 2,400 people and pledged $1.4 million for abortion support. Autumn Celeste from Blue Ridge says a surge in patients and increasing costs have pushed the fund to rethink how to raise money.
But it really just highlights our need to ramp up our own development tactics and really ensure that we're not having to rely on some of these philanthropic avenues that we had been relying on in the past.
Virginia has become a hub for abortion access as bans spread across the South. Out-of-state patients almost doubled from 2023 to 2024, according to data from the Guttmacher Institute. For Pasqua, the fight is both political and deeply personal.
In reproductive justice, you dream big. You want collective liberation for all. You want access to all the good things in life, bodily autonomy and safe and sustainable communities.
But Pasqua says politics are making the work harder. Large foundations are shifting money toward campaigns for a constitutional amendment to protect abortion access. That leaves fewer resources for patients who need care. As of this summer, Hampton Roads Reproductive Justice League has raised more than $90,000 for abortion access and has helped more than 500 people in Hampton Roads. Yi Qingwan, WHRO News.
Still ahead on Weekly Edition, the Department of Transportation is reversing millions of dollars in funds for offshore wind projects, including one in Norfolk. But first, North Carolina has spent nearly $700 million in recent years to expand broadband internet across the state. But the state now has more than double that amount in federal funding available to connect people who still don't have access to high speeds. WUNC's Colin Campbell has more on the program.
Broadband internet connections have been hard to get in rural communities. State and federal funding has been slowly chipping away at the need for years. The latest set of grants awarded in June have been through a program called Completing Access to Broadband, or CAB. That means the state has been able to get high-speed internet to 250,000 homes and businesses. The state's Department of Information Technology has paused the CAB program with about $60 million left to spend. That's because the agency is up against tight deadlines for a newer federal program that's directing $1.5 billion for broadband in North Carolina. The new program is called Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or BEAD. BEAD will differ from the state's previous 2 grant programs because it's not limited to fiber broadband connections. Angie Taylor is director of the state's Broadband Infrastructure Office. Taylor says the BEAD funding could finally get North Carolina serving all remaining homes and businesses.
I think the combination of technologies is what helps us. It's 100%, a universal service coverage goal under BEAD.
I'm Colin Campbell.
Governor Glenn Youngkin will leave office with Virginia's standards of learning test results about where he inherited them. WVTF's Brad Kuttner has this report on Youngkin's last chance to deliver on a campaign promise to improve Virginia's school test scores.
We have made the tests harder, and yet students' performance improved.
That was Governor Glenn Youngkin announcing the release of SOL test scores for the 24-25 school year for the 3rd to 8th grade. The statewide assessment was presented as a range, with pass rates in English between 66 and 73%, and math between 64 and 72%. The scores remain within the same range since Youngkin took office in 2021. The governor again blamed COVID-era school closures, lower standards he said previous administrations set, and an increase in difficulty in the most recent year's tests. Ann Holton, the last democratically appointed member of the Virginia Board of Education who left her seat in June, said changes were made to last year's tests, but as part of the normal 7-year cycle. Holton also said the scores suggest Virginia students haven't recovered from pandemic-era learning loss, and while Youngkin blamed tests, Holton blamed Youngkin's politicization of schools. In Richmond, I'm Brad Kuttner.
Senator Mark Warner says federal budget cuts passed by Republicans risk closing rural hospitals in Virginia and across the United States. Warner met Tuesday with community members at Southampton Medical Center in Franklin, one of 6 rural hospitals in the state that could close or face major service reductions. Hospital officials warned of a potentially huge influx of uninsured patients.
Our hospital systems need to be more transparent and straight with the community. I wish some of the folks who voted for this bill that's going to make these kind of cuts had been able to hear these concerns.
Senate Democrats sent a letter urging a reversal of the cuts earlier this summer, citing 338 rural hospitals around the nation that could be devastated by funding losses.
A nursing professor at Old Dominion University recently earned national recognition for her work to reduce climate impacts in healthcare. Janice Hawkins was one of 10 finalists in the American Climate Leadership Awards. WHRO's Catherine Hafner spoke with Hawkins, who's also ODU's Vice Provost for Academic Affairs.
You've spent more than 3 decades in the nursing field. What got you interested in climate activism?
Well, as nurses, we're on the front lines of healthcare, so we do see what impacts health. Since the beginning of my nursing career, we recognize that the environment impacts health. But then in my role at ODU and community health nursing, what you tend to recognize quickly is that climate and environment impacts populations disproportionately. We see our patients come in with higher rates of asthma, more students and more children that are on asthma medications now than when I first became a nurse. More patients come into the ER because of high heat days. So I think seeing the increase in negative health outcomes related to climate change and then recognizing that nurses are the ones that can make a difference in that is where I really started to engage in this work.
You've also spoken about how the healthcare industry impacts climate. What have you learned?
You know, one of the first things you learn when you're in a health professions program is that our goal is to do no harm. So then to be a part of an industry where healthcare in the U.S. generates 8% of carbon emissions, directly within our healthcare systems, we're using more energy, producing waste. We wash 5 billion pounds of linen annually in the U.S. Per patient, we generate a lot of waste that ends up in landfills and contributes to negative climate input. Some of that waste is for a good reason, but it amounts to a lot. The healthcare industry, we need to check ourselves. We need to reduce our own waste. Then we also need to be a part of the policies that would positively influence climate action. And then we need to be prepared to take care of the patients that are impacted by climate change.
Tell me about how you've integrated all of this knowledge into your role as a nursing educator.
The first thing we did was we created a module on climate and health and inserted that in our community health course. Within the healthcare systems in Hampton Roads, of course, we have students that do their clinical rotations there, but I think more importantly, they're going to be the workforce that staffs the hospitals in the future. So when I think about what we're doing at ODU is we're preparing the future nursing workforce, and the same nurses that are going to have an opportunity to influence these policies, to reduce waste within their hospitals, to provide patient care for patients that are impacted by climate change. One of my favorite things that we did is we worked with the Virginia Department of Forestry to plant about 100 trees at the Old Dominion University Virginia Beach Higher Ed campus. We taught the positive impact of planting trees to the environment and to your health.
How does it feel to get national recognition for this work, and what's next?
One of my goals was to let others know that nurses are really designed for this work. We have the knowledge for this work, and we should be engaged in this work. If part of our ethical commitment in our role is to care about the communities we serve and positively influence health in the communities we serve, then sometimes that goes beyond the bedside and it does go in the community, and sometimes it even goes into state policies and national policies. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. When I think about this going forward, what I hope is that it just exponentially grows and you teach one and then they teach two and then they teach four. My main goal is what I'll do is recruit more to be involved.
That was ODU professor Janice Hawkins with WHRO climate reporter Katherine Hafner.
Democratic Congressman Bobby Scott held his annual Labor Day cookout last weekend. Peninsula residents came out to celebrate, while Democratic candidates and politicians had a chance to campaign. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson reports.
Between food and dance, Democrats also reminded guests of the challenges Virginia will face because of cuts to federal programs. Scott says congressional Democrats are willing to work across the aisle to undo decisions like cutting Medicaid and SNAP food assistance.
But when they try to cut taxes for the wealthy and make people pay for it by bumping 15 million people off their health insurance, taking away nutrition benefits, making it harder to go to college, and running up $3.4 trillion in debt, we're not going to work with them. We're going to fight that tooth and nail.
Scott says President Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill is mostly damaging, but he does praise the small provisions for the shipbuilding industry and the temporary tax break on tips. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
Demand for power has never been higher in Virginia, and the growth of data centers is expected to expand that demand exponentially. WVTF's Michael Pope tells us that's part of the push behind nuclear energy.
For many people, the thought of nuclear energy brings to mind 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, huge disasters and threats to the environment. But supporters say nuclear power is safe and reliable. Stephen Hayner at the Thomas Jefferson Institute says the real debate is about scale.
The debate really in the industry is, do we really want to build the small modular reactors, or should we just go ahead and build a couple of full-size reactors instead? Because 2 or 3 modular reactors don't even really equal 1 full-size reactor. So I think looking down the road 10, 15, 20 years, that's the debate. Are we going to build the smaller reactors, or are we going to build one of the larger ones again?
One of the chief supporters of small modular reactors is Governor Glenn Youngkin, who says it should be part of an all-of-the-above approach to energy. But Tim Sawinski at the Sierra Club says small modular reactors, known as SMRs, are an unproven technology.
We think that energy growth should be predicated on proof. And the problem with SMRs and nuclear energy at the type that they're trying to build is that they haven't proven to work. They haven't been proven to deliver energy to customers. That's an issue considering Virginia allows Dominion Energy and Appalachian Power to charge customers for something that isn't built yet.
Last year, the governor signed a bill that allows Dominion and Appalachian to recover costs for developing small modular reactors. Potentially one of the most lasting legacies of Youngkin's time in office. I'm Michael Pope.
The Department of Transportation is pulling back hundreds of millions of dollars for what it calls doomed offshore wind projects. WHRO's Ryan Murphy reports that it includes one site in Norfolk.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy calls the 12 projects losing funding wasteful and says they were using resources that could revitalize the nation's shipbuilding industry. Norfolk is losing more than $39 million it was awarded in 2023 to redevelop the Fairwinds Landing Marine Terminal in Lamberts Point into a hub for offshore wind development. Construction on the $500 million project has been ongoing for more than 2 years. It's unclear what the loss of federal funding will mean for the development. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
The U.S. Navy is embracing a plan to privatize many of its barracks, the buildings that typically house younger unmarried sailors. Officials hope private companies can do a better job constructing and managing the barracks, which have long been the subject of complaints about mold and other maintenance problems. A major focus of the Navy's privatization plan will be in Norfolk. WHRO's Steve Walsh reports for the American Homefront Project.
Rob Evans is a former National Guard and Reserve soldier. 2 years ago, he started Hots and Cots, an influential blog that lets young troops rate their living conditions.
Those living in the barracks, junior enlisted, a lot of times this is their first time in the military. I want them to feel like they have a voice and they're being heard. And I wanted to give them that platform.
From Fort Hood to Naval Station Norfolk, soldiers, sailors, and Marines post pictures of their rooms and rate the food at the dining facility.
I'm finding that there's a lot of barracks in poor conditions, mold, AC is not working, food is not what you expect, raw chicken. But I do find that there is these diamonds in the rough.
In the defense budget moving through Congress, the Navy would get $380 million to turn over barracks in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia to a private contractor. The Army is looking at similar projects, though Norfolk would be the largest example in the military, more than 8,000 beds across 4 locations. But Evans says he's not sure privatizing the barracks is the best way to fix the Navy's housing problem.
I understand military construction takes a long time. It's expensive. We need to stop taking money away from facilities management. The Secretary of Defense did this to fund the border mission.
The Army is moving more than $1 billion from barracks improvements and other projects to fund the border operation. Leslie Gold, Director of Navy Fleet and Family Readiness Program, said in 2024 that the Navy sees privatization as a faster route to improving conditions in the barracks.
I think going this route allows for greater flexibility for the amenities that a sailor will need for quality of life than what the Navy can do.
A 2023 Government Accountability Office report found that the Department of Defense was running a $137 billion backlog of deferred maintenance, with substandard barracks throughout the system. Corey Titus with the Military Officers Association is worried that the military is about to repeat the problems that happened when the Pentagon privatized all family housing in the 1990s.
There were some noticeable improvements right off the bat, but now a few decades later, we're seeing the same problems repeating themselves.
Especially over the last decade, complaints against the companies pushed Congress to create a Tenants' Bill of Rights and other measures to take control of the process. He says some of those same companies want to run private barracks.
Our concern is with how this gets structured, what are the lessons learned from this initiative, and what's going to be done differently if we're going to go down this path again.
The Air Force is also looking at privatizing its dormitories for young airmen, especially in remote places or areas with high rent. The Marines are the lone holdout.
We have a nice area for them to sit in a common space to, hang out and do what Marines do and BS with each other in the evenings.
Marine First Lieutenant Thomas Garvey showed off a barracks that opened at Naval Weapons Station Yorktown in Virginia in 2023. It looks almost like a college dorm with kitchenettes and private showers. Garvey says the project was first approved in 2008.
So that's when it started to go through all the planning process, presented to Congress for funding, etc. It is a long process.
But owning the barracks gives the Marines more control, he says. In the meantime, a Navy spokesman says the Navy expects to have a deal with a private company for Hampton Roads in the coming weeks. In Norfolk, I'm Steve Walsh.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Ryan Murphy, Steve Walsh, Michelle Hankerson, Catherine Hefner, I-Ching Wang, WVTF's Brad Kuttner and Michael Pope, and WUNC's Colin Campbell. Also, Connor Worley, who produced today's show.
A reminder that you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed. You can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed.
For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Barry Graham.
And I'm Jordan Christie. Have a great weekend.